A welcome to Cozy Fireside Mysteries. I'm Alistair Gray. November Fog, 1926. A priceless medieval codex vanishes from a locked vault, then reappears beside a keeper with her throat cut. Hercule Poirot steps into Bloomsbury's Emberwick Archive, where 6 suspects hide motives sharper than the murderer's blade. A fingerprint too perfect, a minute lost in time, a breath on cold mercury. 100 years later, the real secret still sleeps behind a forgery. Pull your chair closer, let the fire crackle. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? The truth begins now. Chapter 1. The Emberwick Archive. The fog that November morning in 1926 was not merely weather, it was a living thing, thick and deliberate, curling its gray fingers around the iron railings of Bloomsbury Square as though the city itself were reluctant to wake. Gas lamps still burned along the pavements, their halos smeared into sickly amber bruises. Carriages clopped past with muffled hooves, and the rare motor car hissed like an offended cat. Somewhere a church bell tolled 7, but the sound arrived late, as if the fog had detained it for questioning. At number 17 stood the Emberwick Archive. To the casual eye, it was only another Georgian townhouse. 4 stories of soot-darkened brick, sash windows blinded by velvet curtains, a brass knocker shaped like a griffin whose beak had long ago been polished into a permanent sneer. Yet those who knew whispered that behind the nondescript door lay corridors lined with secrets sharp enough to draw blood. For a century and a half, the archive had guarded documents no government dared print and no family wished to remember. Treasonous letters sealed with royal wax, ledgers of slave ship profits annotated in a bishop's hand, love notes from a queen to her equerry written in lemon juice that browned only under flame. The building smelled perpetually of vellum, candle smoke, and the faint iron tang of old scandals. Hercule Poirot arrived at precisely 7:42 a.m., stepping from a taxicab with the neatness of a chess piece placed by a confident hand. His patent leather shoes scarcely disturbed the film of moisture on the pavement. He wore a charcoal overcoat cut so perfectly that it seemed to defy the damp. And beneath the brim of his bowler, his mustaches, those magnificent, symmetrical mustaches, curved upward like the wings of a triumphant moth. In his gloved hand he carried not a cane but a silver-topped walking stick, which he used less for support than for emphasis, as one might wield a conductor's baton. The telegram that had summoned him still rustled in his pocket, its urgency undiminished by the journey from his flat in Whitehaven Mansions. Poirot disliked telegrams. They were the prose of panic. Yet the name Emberwick had pricked his curiosity the way a single discordant note alerts the ear of a musician. He had encountered the archive once before in 1919 when a nervous undersecretary begged him to authenticate a forged treaty that might have restarted the war. Poirot had exposed the forgery in 11 minutes, using nothing more than a magnifying glass and an intimate knowledge of 17th century ink. The undersecretary had wept with relief. The archive had sent a polite note of thanks and a jar of quince jam. Poirot still had the jar. The jam had long since crystallized into amber shards. He mounted the 3 stone steps. The griffin knocker stared down with medieval disdain. Poirot lifted it once, twice, and the sound boomed through the house like a judge's gavel. The door opened inward on silent hinges. A draught of warm air carried the scent of beeswax, old paper, and something metallic. Fear, perhaps, or blood too recently spilled to announce itself. In the doorway stood a woman of 42, tall and angular, dressed in a charcoal skirt and high-necked blouse the color of storm clouds. Her hair, the pale gold of winter wheat, was drawn back so severely that it seemed to tighten the skin across her cheekbones. Steel-rimmed spectacles flashed in the gaslight. This was Dr. Evelyn Hartwell, keeper of the Emberwick Archive. and if her handshake was firm, her eyes were not. They flickered over Poirot's shoulder as though expecting pursuit. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, the vowels clipped like boxwood. "You are punctual. I feared the fog might devour you." "Fog," Poirot replied, stepping inside, "is merely a curtain, and Hercule Poirot is never late to raise it." He removed his hat, revealing hair as black and glossy as a raven's wing, and surveyed the entrance hall. It was a cavern of oak and shadow. A grandfather clock ticked with the solemnity of a metronome counting down to doomsday. Portraits of long-dead Emberwick trustees glared from the walls, their eyes following visitors with the weary suspicion of men who had guarded too many secrets. A staircase swept upward into gloom. Beneath it, a green baize door presumably led to the nether regions where the real treasures slept. To the left, an archway opened into what had once been a drawing room and was now the reading room. A cathedral of books where scholars came to worship and occasionally to sin. Evelyn Hartwell closed the door. The click of the latch sounded final. "You will take chocolate?" she asked. It was not a question of hospitality, but of ritual. The archive served chocolate to all distinguished visitors, a tradition begun by the first keeper in 1789 who believed cacao sharpened the intellect. Poirot inclined his head. "If it is the Belgian, thick and dark as midnight, then oui. If it is the English, thin, apologetic, then non. I prefer my own thoughts unsweetened." A flicker of amusement crossed her face, the first crack in the ice. "We import from Brussels. This way." She led him beneath the archway. The reading room was lit by green-shaded lamps that turned complexions the color of old parchment. Mahogany tables marched in, orderly ranks. Above them, galleries of shelving rose 3 stories high, accessible by spiral stairs so narrow they seemed designed to discourage the merely curious. The air was heavy with the breath of centuries. Poirot inhaled and felt history settle on his tongue like dust. At the far end, a fireplace of carved marble roared with a fire large enough to roast an ox, though the heat barely reached the center of the room. Around it, arranged with the precision of a Last Supper, sat 5 individuals who turned as one when Poirot entered. Their faces were a gallery of human motives: greed, fear, pride, longing, and something darker that had not yet found its name. Evelyn Hartwell performed introductions with the brisk efficiency of a museum guide. Captain Reginald Thorne, late of the Royal Fusiliers. A man in his mid-30s rose awkwardly, favoring his left leg. He wore a regimental tie and the faintly desperate air of one who has misplaced his future. His eyes, the pale blue of a winter sea, fixed on Poirot with the intensity of a debtor assessing a creditor. A silver flask glinted in his breast pocket. Miss Lavinia Blackwood, our senior cataloger. A young woman of 28, slight and dark, with ink-stained fingers that fluttered like trapped moths. Her gaze darted to Evelyn and away again, as though the keeper were a flame too bright to stare at directly. She wore a cardigan the color of dried violets and smelled faintly of bergamot tea. Professor Percival Drayton, visiting paleographer from Oxford, a stooped gentleman of 60 with a mane of white hair and a brass ear trumpet that caught the firelight like a miniature sun. He cupped a hand behind one ear and bellowed, "Hey! Speak up!" though no one had spoken. Mr. Silas Grubba, our night porter. A thick-set man in a porter's uniform 2 sizes too large, his left hand missing the index and middle fingers. His eyes were small and shrewd, set deep in a face that had known prison pallor. He gave Poirot a nod that managed to be both deferential and defiant. Lady Felicity Emberwick. The last of the line rose with the languid grace of one to the manor born. She was 38, dressed in mourning black, though her husband had died a decade earlier in a hunting accident widely believed to be suicide. A veil obscured her upper face, but her mouth was a perfect crimson slash. Diamonds glittered at her throat like tiny accusations. Poirot bowed to each in turn, his eyes cataloging details the way a jeweler assesses flaws. The tremor in Captain Thorne's left hand, the ink smudge on Miss Blackwood's cuff shaped suspiciously like a letter E, the faint bruise on Professor Drayton's wrist where the ear trumpet pressed too hard, the way Silas Grubb's remaining fingers worried at a loose button, the scent of expensive French perfume clinging to Lady Felicity like a second skin. Evelyn clapped once for silence. A maid appeared, silent, starched, invisible, and set a silver tray on the central table. A pot of chocolate so dark it seemed to absorb light, tiny porcelain cups no larger than thimbles, and a plate of madeleines still warm from the oven. Poirot accepted a cup. The chocolate was perfection, velvet heat, a whisper of vanilla, the faintest bite of chili at the finish. He sipped, closed his eyes, and allowed the little gray cells to arrange themselves like soldiers on parade. When he opened them again, the room had grown quieter than a crypt. "Bien," he said softly. "Now, Dr. Hartwell, you will tell me of this priceless folio that requires the attention of Hercule Poirot." Evelyn's hand went unconsciously to a ribbon at her throat. From it hung a key, old iron, elaborate wards, the kind that opened doors to more than rooms. "The Codex Emberwick," she said. 14th century, illuminated by the monks of St. Aldrich's Abbey. 112 vellum leaves, gold leaf, lapis, vermilion. But the illumination is not the point. She leaned forward, voice dropping to a conspirator's hush. The final 10 pages contain a coronation oath, lost, forgotten, believed apocryphal. If authentic, it proves the current line. She stopped, glanced at Lady Felicity, who smiled thinly behind her veil. "Let us say it would inconvenience certain parties in Buckingham Palace." Poirot's eyebrows ascended. "You suggest, madame, a document capable of toppling crowns?" "I suggest," Evelyn corrected, "a document someone wishes to steal, destroy, or sell to the highest bidder. 3 nights ago, an attempt was made on the vault. The intruder was..." Interrupted. Her gaze flicked to Silas Grubb, who stared at the carpet as though it might open and swallow him. "The vault?" Poirot prompted. "This way." She led them, not just Poirot, but the entire suspicious ensemble, through a side door, down a narrow staircase lit by a single gas jet that hissed like an angry cat. The air grew colder, damper. At the bottom, a corridor of dressed stone stretched 20 feet to a steel door that looked as though it belonged on a battleship. A Chubb lock gleamed. Above it, a clockwork dial time lock set to open at 6 a.m. daily. Evelyn touched the door with something like reverence. "Triple redundancy, the Chubb requires my key. The time lock cannot be forced. And the pressure plate inside the cradle..." She produced a small brass key from her pocket and inserted it into a secondary lock beside the door. A panel slid aside, revealing a glass gauge. "Registers the exact weight of the codex, 1.8 kilograms. Remove it and alarms ring in 3 constabularies." Poirot examined the mechanism with the delight of a child presented with a new toy. "Exquisite. And the ventilation?" "A slit." She pointed to a horizontal aperture 9 inches high, 14 inches wide, 9 feet above the floor. Iron bars no wider than a man's wrist. Even a child could not pass. Captain Thorne gave a humorless laugh. "Unless the child was a contortionist with a grudge." Professor Drayton cupped his ear trumpet. "Eh? Grudge?" Lady Felicity's voice floated from behind her veil, cool as cellar stone. "The codex is the heart of the Emberwick estate. Without it, the trust dissolves. My home crumbles. Literally, dry rot in the east wing. Miss Blackwood whispered so low only Poirot heard. It's more than a book. It's alive. Silas Grubb said nothing, but his remaining fingers curled into a fist. Poirot stepped back, twirling his mustache. 6 suspects, 6 motives, 1 impenetrable vault. The little gray cells stirred like cats waking from a nap. "Dr. Hartwell," he said, "you mentioned an intruder 3 nights ago. Tell me precisely what occurred." Evelyn's hand returned to the key at her throat. At 2:17 a.m., the pressure alarm triggered. Silas was on duty. He found the vault door closed, time lock engaged, but the cradle empty. The codex was gone. Yet when the mechanism reset at 6:01 a.m., there it was again, untouched. No prints, no scratches, as though it had never left. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A disappearance and a return, like a conjurer's trick. "Or a warning?" Lady Felicity murmured. The grandfather clock in the hall above struck 8. Somewhere in the stacks, a book slid from a shelf and thumped to the floor. No one moved to retrieve it. Poirot finished his chocolate, set the cup down with a delicate click. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced, "the game, I think, has already begun. And Hercule Poirot, he is ready to play." Chapter 2. The crime discovered at night. The building exhaled centuries of dust and candle smoke through the keyholes, and the portraits in the entrance hall shifted imperceptibly, as though the painted eyes followed the moon across the skylight. Gas jets were turned low to blue pinpricks, and the only illumination in the lower corridors came from the faint green glow of the vault's time-locked dial, ticking with the patience of a hanging judge. Silas Grubb made his final round at 10:58 p.m. precisely. 20 years in Dartmoor had taught him that clocks were tyrants, and he obeyed them with the fervor of a reformed sinner. He carried a bull's-eye lantern whose beam cut a coin-sized circle through the darkness. His boots, issued by the archive, soles thick as Bibles, made no sound on the flagstones. At the vault door he paused, pressed his ear to the steel, and listened. Nothing. The time lock showed 11:02. He watched the minute hand crawl forward, click, settle. Satisfied, he climbed the service stairs to the porter's lodge, a cupboard under the main staircase where a camp bed and a kettle constituted luxury. Upstairs, the house disposed itself for the night. Dr. Evelyn Hartwell locked her office at 10:45, the key on its ribbon tucked inside her blouse like a secret heartbeat. She had spent the evening annotating a 12th century palimpsest, and her eyes burned with the strain of deciphering scraped parchment. She paused outside the guest wing, listening. Captain Thorne's snores rattled like loose shutters. Professor Drayton's ear trumpet lay on the hall table, its bell mouth open in silent accusation. Miss Blackwood's door was ajar, lamplight spilling in a thin gold blade across the runner. Evelyn hesitated, then moved on. Lavinia often worked late. Let her. Lady Felicity Emberwick glided past in a dressing gown of midnight silk, a glass of something amber in her hand. Their eyes met. No words. Felicity's door closed with the finality of a coffin lid. At 11:15, the house lights dimmed to a murmur. Somewhere a pipe coughed. The fog outside thickened until the street lamps vanished entirely, leaving only the red glow of a distant pub sign pulsing like a dying ember. Silence, thick, ecclesiastical, descended. The first anomaly was subtle, a faint metallic snick from the cellar, no louder than a mouse testing a trap. Silas Grubb, dozing upright in his chair, did not hear it. His missing fingers ached with the cold. He flexed the stumps and drifted back into a dream of prison bells. The grandfather clock in the hall, visible from the first-floor landing, performed a small, almost imperceptible hiccup. Its pendulum, which had swung with monastic regularity since 1789, paused for the breadth of a heartbeat, then resumed. The minute hand did not advance. A trained ear might have noticed. No trained ear was listening. In the vault, the temperature dropped 2 degrees. The mercury thermometer embedded in the wall, a Victorian precaution against ink contraction, shivered, contracted, and triggered a hair-fine relay. The time lock, calibrated to thermal expansion, advanced its internal gears by 3 minutes. The dial now read 5:57. No alarm sounded. The change was within tolerance. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadow of the ventilation slit. It was not a person, too narrow, too fluid, but a length of silk cord weighted with a lead shot, lowered on a thread of spider silk from the slit 9 feet above. The cord brushed the pressure cradle. Nothing. It withdrew. A second cord, this one bearing a small brass mirror no larger than a half-crown, descended, angled, caught the faint glow of the time lock dial, and reflected it upward through the slit to an eye pressed to the bars. The vault door opened from the inside. Dr. Evelyn Hartwell stepped out, barefoot, hair loose, a candle in a tin holder in her left hand. She wore a dressing gown of dark green velvet, the ribbon and key still at her throat. Her face was pale but composed. Insomnia had driven her to check the codex one final time. She closed the door behind her, softly so as not to wake the house, turned the Chubb lock with her own key and reset the time lock dial to 6 a.m. out of habit. The candle flame trembled as she climbed the 3 steps to the corridor. She never saw the figure waiting in the alcove beneath the stairs. The blade was a Wilkinson straight razor, its mother-of-pearl handle worn smooth by generations of gentlemanly throats. It flashed once, silver in the candlelight, and opened Evelyn's neck from ear to ear with the neatness of a letter opener slitting an envelope. Blood sheeted down the green velvet, hot and shockingly red. The candle fell, rolled, guttered in the widening pool. Evelyn's knees buckled. She made no sound. The cut had severed her windpipe before her brain could form a scream. The killer knelt, dipped a gloved finger in the blood, and pressed a single perfect fingerprint onto the brass lock plate, center, deliberate, almost reverent. Then, with the same finger, wiped the razor clean on Evelyn's ribbon, leaving a crimson comma. The key was unhooked, the door unlocked, the body dragged back inside. The door closed. The lock clicked. The time lock, now reading 5:57, engaged with a soft, satisfied snick. Upstairs, the grandfather clock resumed its normal rhythm. The lost minute was gone, swallowed by the fog. Silas Grubb awoke with a start, the kettle on his spirit stove hissing like a serpent. He lurched to his feet, checked his pocket watch, 6:02, and cursed. The vault should have opened 3 minutes ago. He grabbed his ring of keys and shuffled down the corridor, lantern swinging. The time lock dial glowed 6 salag. He turned the Chubb, pushed. The door swung inward on oiled hinges. The lantern light fell across a tableau that froze the breath in his throat. Dr. Evelyn Hartwell lay sprawled across the central reading table, arms flung wide as though embracing an invisible lover. Her head was tilted back, the gash in her throat a second grinning mouth. Blood had cascaded over the table's edge, pooling on the flagstones in a lake so glossy it reflected the vault's single bulb like a dark mirror. The candle stub floated in it, wick still smoking. The key on its ribbon lay in the hollow of her collarbone, unstained. The pressure cradle was empty, but the codex, glorious, impossible, was back in its place, open to the coronation oath page as though it had never been disturbed. Silas dropped the lantern. Glass shattered, oil flared. He screamed, a raw animal sound that ricocheted up the stairwell and shattered the morning into 1,000 jagged pieces. Hercule Poirot was already awake. He sat at the small writing desk in his guest room, fully dressed, a cup of his own private chocolate cooling beside an open notebook. He had heard the scream, distant but unmistakable, and was halfway down the main staircase before the echo died. His walking stick tapped a staccato rhythm on the oak treads. Captain Thorne stumbled from his room in shirt sleeves, hair wild, eyes bloodshot. "What the devil?" Professor Drayton appeared, clutching his ear trumpet like a weapon. "Gunshot? Is it revolution?" Miss Blackwood emerged last, wrapping a dressing gown around her slight frame, face the color of candle wax. Lady Felicity followed, veil lifted, eyes bright with something that might have been fear or excitement. They converged in the entrance hall as Silas burst up from the cellar, blood on his cuffs, babbling incoherently. "Dead, she's dead, the codex, blood." Poirot raised a hand. Silence fell like a guillotine. "Compose yourself, monsieur. You will take us to the vault, at once." The vault was a slaughterhouse. Inspector Japp arrived 10 minutes later, summoned by a telephone call Poirot insisted Silas make despite the porter's protests. Japp, mustache bristling, bowler hat clutched to his chest, took one look and whistled low. "Locked room, Belgian. Your speciality." Poirot did not reply. He was on his knees beside the body, magnifying glass in hand, examining the fingerprint on the lock plate. The print was perfect. Ridges sharp, no smudging, the sort of print one saw in textbooks, not crime scenes. "Curious," he murmured. "Too perfect, perhaps." He stood, twirled his mustache, and began to prowl. "Observations rapid fire." Japp scratched his head. "Door locked from the inside, key on the body, time lock engaged, no other exit. Yet someone got in, killed her, and got out. Impossible." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Impossible? Non, mon ami. Merely improbable." He turned to the assembled suspects, lined up like mourners at a funeral they had orchestrated. "Mesdames et messieurs, the curtain has risen on Act 2, and someone among you has already taken their bow. In blood." Outside, the fog began to lift, revealing a city that had no idea it was now the stage for murder. Chapter 3, Investigation begins. Inspector Japp had strung red tape across the threshold, official, futile, and posted a young constable who looked as though he might be sick at any moment. The air inside was thick with blood and bergamot, the metallic sweetness of slaughter overlaid by the ghost of Lavinia Blackwood's morning tea. Poirot lingered on the top step, breathing through a handkerchief scented with verbena. He disliked the smell of death. It was untidy. Upstairs, the archive had transformed into a hive of subdued panic. Maids fluttered like startled pigeons. A typist wept into her shorthand notebook. The telephone rang unanswered. Poirot dispatched Japp to secure the crime scene and herded the 5 surviving suspects into the oak-paneled library on the first floor. The fire had been laid but not lit. November chill seeped through the sash windows and pooled on the turkey rugs. Gas sconces hissed. Portraits of Emberwick patriarchs glowered down as though personally offended by the interruption to routine. Poirot took the chair at the head of the long table. Carved mahogany, scarred by generations of quills, and arranged his walking stick across his knees like a scepter. Japp hovered by the door, notebook poised. The suspects sat in a ragged semicircle, each claiming a pool of lamplight as though it might protect them. "Bien," Poirot began, voice soft but carrying to the rafters. "We begin with the facts. Dr. Hartwell was murdered between 5:29 and 5:33 a.m. The vault was locked from within, the time lock engaged, the key upon her person. Yet the door was opened at 6:03 by Monsieur Gruber and the body discovered. Someone entered, killed, and exited. Impossible, you will say. Hercule Poirot says merely difficult. We shall interview each of you, one at a time. The order is mine." He consulted a small leather notebook, though he had already memorized the sequence. First, Captain Reginald Thorne. Reggie limped in, flask glinting. He had dressed hastily, regimental tie askew, collar stud missing. The limp was pronounced this morning, Yesterday it had been barely noticeable. He dropped into the chair opposite Poirot as though his legs had betrayed him. Poirot wasted no time. "Captain, your glove was found snagged on the ventilation bars. Monogrammed RT, you will explain." Reggie's hand went to his pocket, came out empty. "Devil take it. Left glove, silk lining. Lost it days ago. Thought the laundry—" He stopped, aware of the hole he was digging. "Look, Poirot, I'm in the soup, I know. Debts at White's, Sharks in Soho. 40,000 quid. The Codex. Rumor says there's a map to Templar gold hidden in the illuminations. I was going to photograph it, sell the plates to a collector in Vienna. Needed Evelyn's help. She refused. I may have forged an auction catalog offering the Codex for 100 grand, post-dated tomorrow. Meant to frighten her into cooperating, that's all." Poirot examined it without touching. "You planned embezzlement, not murder." "God's truth." Reggie's voice cracked. "Found her already dead. Glove must have been planted." Poirot's eyes flicked to the limp. "Your leg, Captain, the Somme?" "Shrapnel. Heals slow in wet weather." Reggie shifted. The limp vanished for a fraction of a second as he reached for the flask. Poirot noted it. "You may go. For now." Lavinia entered clutching a handkerchief that smelled of bergamot and salt tears. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but the pupils were pinpricks, shock or calculation. She sat very straight, hands folded as though in prayer. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, "the scent in the vault. Bergamot. Your tea." She flinched. "I brew it strong. Evelyn, Dr. Hartwell liked it too. We shared a pot last night." 10:30, she was agitated, said someone had tried to photograph the Codex again. I offered to sit with her, but she sent me to bed. A sob escaped. "If I'd stayed, you would perhaps be dead also. Tell me of your movements after 11:15. "I read in my room, Paleographia Sacra. Fell asleep with the light on, woke to Silas screaming." She twisted the handkerchief. "I loved her, Monsieur Poirot. Not like that, though," people whisper. "She was my mentor, my sister in scholarship." Poirot's gaze softened a fraction. "Yet you catalogued the Codex. You know its secrets. Every page." Her voice dropped. "The oath isn't the danger. There's a marginal note, cipher. Evelyn decoded it last week. I saw the transcription." She hesitated. "It names a royal bastard, 14th century. If published, the House of Windsor trembles," Poirot finished. "And Dr. Hartwell intended to publish?" Lavinia shook her head violently. "No, she wanted to bury it, but someone else knew." Poirot dismissed her with a nod. As she reached the door, he called softly, "Mademoiselle, your handkerchief, the monogram. E.H. Dr. Hartwell's?" Lavinia froze. "She lent it to me yesterday. Ink stain." The professor shuffled in, ear trumpet clutched like a bludgeon. He was deaf in the left ear, but his right caught every nuance of suspicion. Poirot raised his voice theatrically. "Professor, you are an expert in medieval orthography. The Codex threatens your life's work?" Drayton bellowed back, "Threatens? Balderdash! The oath's a 16th century interpolation, forgery. I came to prove it. Evelyn refused me access after hours. Said the vault was sensitive." He rummaged in his waistcoat and produced a medieval quill. Goose, nib-crusted with what looked suspiciously like dried blood. "Found this in the waste bin yesterday, not mine." Poirot took the quill with a handkerchief. The blood was dark, flaking. Human? He would test later. Asleep. Deaf, not dead. Heard nothing till the scream. Drayton's eyes darted to the fireplace. "Though, odd thing. My pocket watch stopped at 5:29, started again when I wound it. Cheap mechanism." Silas entered hunched, cap in hand. The stumps of his fingers worried at the brim. "Monsieur Grubb," Poirot said. 20 years in Dartmoor for forgery. You can pick a chub luck. Silas's eyes narrowed. I, 42 seconds blindfolded. But the time lock can't be picked, and I never touched the lady. His voice roughened. She gave me this job. Said a man deserves a second chance. Yet 3 nights ago the codex vanished and returned. You were on duty. Silas paled. Alarm went at 2:17. I ran down, door shut, lock engaged, cradle empty, waited till 6. There it was again. No prints. I reported it to Dr. Hartwell. She told me to keep quiet. Poirot leaned forward. And this morning? Woke at 6:02. Vault should have opened. Found... He swallowed. Found her. Poirot studied the man's hands. Calloused, but the remaining fingers were nimble. A forger's hands. Lady Felicity entered like a ship under full sail, veil lifted to reveal eyes the color of winter steel. She carried a small Morocco leather notebook bound with a gold clasp. Lady Felicity, Poirot began, the codex is the keystone of your estate. Without it, the trust dissolves. Dry rot? You said. Correct. Her voice was cut glass. My late husband squandered the fortune. The codex is legally mine to sell if I choose. A museum in Chicago offers $200,000, enough to save Emberwick Hall. She opened the notebook. But there is a clause. If the codex leaves the archive without the keeper's consent, the estate forfeits to the crown. Evelyn refused to consent. Stalemate. Poirot's eyes narrowed. You argued last night? Passionately, 10:15 in her office. She called me a vulture in mourning. I called her a sanctimonious gatekeeper. We parted coldly. Felicity's lips curved. I retired at 11 Omo, took a sleeping draught, laudanum, slept until the scream. Poirot noted the steadiness of her hands. Laudanum left tremors in most. Poirot arranged the items on the table like tarot cards. Observe, Jap. The glove incriminates Reggie. The quill suggests medieval passion. The mirror allows watching from the corridor. The thermometer, explains the time lock. Someone opened the ventilation slit, breathed warm air, contracted the mercury, advanced the mechanism. Clever. But why? Jap scratched his head. To create a 3-minute window? Exactament. The killer needed the vault to open early, 5:57 instead of 6. They entered with Evelyn's key, killed her, staged the scene, locked again. The time lock sealed the illusion. Poirot insisted on a physical test. He, Jap, and a reluctant Reggie returned to the vault. Poirot climbed a library ladder to the ventilation slit, exhaled gently. The thermometer dipped. The relay clicked. The time lock dial jumped 3 minutes. Voila! The killer used the slit not to enter, but to manipulate time itself. Reggie, holding the mirror, angled it from the doorway. The lock combination glowed clear. Anyone in the corridor could watch Evelyn reset the dial, Jap muttered. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And the phosphor dust on the clock hands, cataloger's gloves. Miss Blackwood handles luminous paint for marginalia. Poirot closed his notebook. Red herrings swim in schools. The glove, the quill, the catalogue. Too many, too obvious. The true clue is the lost minute and the warm breath on cold mercury. Someone planned this with the precision of a watchmaker. He turned to the suspects, who had been summoned back. Mesdames et messieurs, the investigation deepens. By luncheon, Hercule Poirot will know which of you breathed murder into the vault. Outside, the fog lifted entirely, revealing a sky the color of a fresh bruise. Chapter 4. Clues and Red Herrings. The fog had burned off by 9:30, leaving a sky the color of tarnished pewter, and a city that smelled of coal smoke and wet stone. Inside the Emberwick Archive, the temperature had risen exactly 2 degrees, but the atmosphere remained arctic. The suspects had been dismissed to their rooms with strict instructions not to communicate. Poirot knew human nature well enough to predict that at least 3 clandestine conversations were already taking place behind locked doors. He did not mind. Whispers were data. He and Inspector Japp commandeered the late Dr. Hartwell's office, a narrow chamber on the ground floor lined floor to ceiling with card catalogs and smelling of bergamot ink and the ghost of Evelyn's lavender water. A single window overlooked the area steps where dustbins crouched like conspirators. Poirot stood at the desk, gloved fingers dancing over the chaos Evelyn had left. An open folio of 13th century charters, a half-eaten apple browning at the core, a brass letter opener shaped like a miniature sword. On the blotter lay her personal diary, bound in Morocco leather, its ribbon marker placed at the entry for 12th of November. Japp locked the door. "Right, Belgian. Lay out your cards." Poirot did not answer at once. He was studying a faint circular stain on the blotter, tea perhaps or something stronger. With a soft humph, he opened the diary. The final entry, written in Evelyn's precise italic hand, read. Poirot tapped the page. Evelyn knew. She was cataloging her enemies. Poirot insisted on a full-scale reenactment in the vault corridor. He positioned Japp at the doorway with the recovered hand mirror, Reggie on the library ladder at the ventilation slit, and Lavinia, pale but composed, at the vault door holding a dummy key. Silas and Felicity watched from the foot of the stairs. Professor Drayton had begged off, citing neuralgia. "Action!" Poirot called, clapping once. Lavinia inserted the key, turned the chub, and pretended to reset the time lock dial to 6 Kong. Japp angled the mirror. From the corridor, the combination glowed clear, 3:18:41. Reggie at the slit exhaled gently. The thermometer dipped. The relay clicked. "Stop!" Poirot cried. The mirror allows observation from the corridor. The breath manipulates time. But observe. He pointed to the floorboards directly beneath the slit. Dust undisturbed except for a single scuff mark, heel of a woman's shoe, size 5. Mademoiselle Blackwood's size. Lavinia flushed crimson. "I catalog in the vault daily. Yet the scuff is fresh. See the grain of the wood, raised, not compressed, made this morning." Back in the office, Poirot opened Evelyn's tea caddy. Inside, loose-leaf Assam and a smaller tin labeled Bergamot Blend, LB. He sniffed. Identical to the vault scent, but the tin was nearly empty, 3 tablespoons remaining, where yesterday Lavinia had claimed it was full. He summoned Lavinia again. "Mademoiselle, your tea tin. You said you shared a pot with Dr. Hartwell last night, yet the tin is depleted by half. Explain." Lavinia's fingers twisted the EH handkerchief. "I spilled some this morning. Nerves." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Spilled or diluted. Bergamot oil is potent. A few drops in water would create a stronger scent, to linger in a closed room." She had no answer. The grandfather clock in the entrance hall was a towering George III piece, its face painted with moons and stars. Poirot climbed the servants' stairs to the mechanism housing. The pendulum hung motionless. Japp had stopped it to preserve the scene. Poirot examined the brass bob. A faint smear of luminous phosphor, used by catalogers to mark margins under black light, glowed faintly on the lower curve. He scraped a sample into an envelope. Phosphor dust matches the gloves worn by Miss Blackwood. She stopped the clock for exactly 1 minute, 5:29 to 5:30, creating an alibi gap for someone else, or herself. Poirot gathered everyone in the vault. Silas, under duress, produced a set of lockpicks from his porter's lodge, ivory handles, exquisitely made. "Show us," Poirot commanded. Silas knelt before the chub. 42 seconds later, the lock clicked open. The room exhaled collectively. "But the time lock," Poirot continued, "cannot be picked. It is clockwork, not tumblers. Monsieur Grubb is innocent of entry, though not perhaps of other sins. Silas's relief was palpable. Poirot had the codex removed to a side table under armed guard. The cradle's pressure plate was calibrated to 1.8 kilos. He placed the manuscript on a scale, 1/802 kilos. Then he weighed a stack of ledgers from Evelyn's office, 1.798 kilos. The alarm did not sound. "The plate has a tolerance of plus 5 grams, he announced. The thief knew this. They substituted a forgery of identical weight. But observe." He turned the codex to the oath page. The drop of blood sat proud, unabsorbed. "Vellum absorbs slowly. This blood is less than 6 hours old. The codex was returned after the murder." Gasps rippled. During the weight test, Reggie reached to steady the scale. His limp vanished entirely for 3 full seconds. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Captain, your injury is selective?" Reggie flushed. "Adrenaline happens sometimes. Or perhaps the limp is the forgery and the debt's the motive. You fake disability for sympathy and access to laudanum from army doctors." Reggie opened his mouth, closed it. Poirot returned to the vault alone. He climbed the ladder, pressed his lips to the slit, and exhaled slowly. The mercury dipped 2.1 degrees. The relay clicked. He repeated the action with a rubber bulb syringe filled with warm water. Same result, no human breath required. "The killer used a tool," he murmured. "Not lungs, a bulb perhaps from a photographer's darkroom. Captain Thorne develops his, non?" The quill from Drayton's pocket was tested with benzidine, positive for blood. Human type O, Evelyn's. But under magnification, Poirot noted the nib was modern steel dipped in medieval-style ink, then blood. A prop. "Planted," he declared, "to suggest a crime of scholarly passion." In Evelyn's darkroom, a converted pantry, Poirot found a glass plate negative of the codex's final page. The cipher was visible, tiny prick marks in the margin. He held it to the light. The transcription matched Lavinia's handwriting. "Lavinia photographed it," he said to Jap. "But the negative Evelyn mentioned is missing. Someone stole the evidence." Poirot allowed a cold collation in the dining room. Ham, chutney, brown bread. Conversation was forbidden. The suspects ate in silence, each watching the others over teacups. Poirot observed, in Evelyn's desk drawer hidden beneath blotting paper, a lump of dental wax with the clear impression of the vault key. Someone had pressed it while Evelyn slept, or was distracted. Poirot pocketed it. Months in planning. Poirot examined Felicity's bedside table. A brown glass bottle, laudanum, 30 minims, half full, but the dropper was clean, unused in days. Felicity's pupils were normal. "She lied," Poirot told Jap. "No sleeping draught, she was awake." In the gardener's shed, a rubber bulb syringe, residue of warm water, and bergamot oil. Lavinia's scent. Poirot smiled grimly. The phantom breath. Back in the office, Poirot arranged the clues like a hand of patience. Red herrings, glove, quill, limp, laudanum, distractions. "The killer," Poirot announced, "is the one who controlled every variable, who knew the weight tolerance, the thermal relay, the cipher, the key impression, who had access to darkroom, garden shed, and cataloger's gloves." Jap whistled. "Lavinia? Or someone using Lavinia as puppet. We are not finished." He stood, twirled his mustache. "Tonight, mes amis, the archive will reveal its final secret, but first, tea. And then, the trap." Outside, the sky darkened again. Rain began to fall, soft as regret. Chapter 5. Complications and Twists. The rain that began at 3 o'clock was not English drizzle. It was a continental deluge, hammered down by a wind that rattled the archive's sash windows like a burglar testing locks. By 4, the sky had turned the color of old pewter, and the gas jets hissed louder to compensate. Electricity had failed at 3:47, blown fuse in the basement, and the house reverted to candlelight. Shadows leapt across the oak paneling, turning familiar corners into strangers' alleys. Somewhere a pipe burst. Water dripped with the steady patience of a torturer. Poirot stood in the entrance hall, coat collar turned up, watching the storm through the fanlight. Japp had telephoned Scotland Yard for extra men. The switchboard was... Poirot did not mind. Darkness was an ally. It made people careless with their secrets. He had dismissed the suspects to the drawing room with strict instructions to remain under candlelight and Constable Hargreaves' watchful eye. The young officer stood by the door, truncheon tapping his palm like a metronome. Poirot slipped away to the vault alone. The vault door was ajar. Japp had left it on the latch for ventilation. Poirot's candle threw a cone of gold across the flagstones. The blood pool had darkened to tar. Evelyn's body lay beneath a sheet, the outline stark as a chalk drawing. But something was wrong. A second sheet, smaller, lay crumpled beside the pressure cradle. Professor Percival Drayton stared up at him with the rigid surprise of the newly dead. His ear trumpet was jammed into his mouth like a grotesque pacifier, the bell smeared with a greenish residue. His eyes, milky in the candlelight, bulged. A thin line of foam traced his lower lip, cyanide. Poirot knelt, careful not to disturb the scene. Time of death, rigor just beginning in the jaw, approximately 12 hours. 4:15 a.m., give or take, before Evelyn. He examined the trumpet. Inside the bell, a gelatin capsule, half dissolved, the kind used by chemists to mask bitter medicines. Someone had filled it with potassium cyanide and lodged it in the trumpet's throat. Drayton, deaf in one ear, had pressed the instrument to his lips to hear a whispered conversation, and swallowed death. Poirot's little gray cells whirred. 2 murders, 11 hours apart in the same locked room. The plot thickened like good rue. In Drayton's pocket, a folded square of photographic paper. Poirot unfolded it beneath the candle, a contact print of the Codex's final page, the coronation oath, showing the marginal cipher in ultraviolet ink. Prick marks formed letters. Drayton had annotated in pencil, superstition or legal trigger. Poirot's mustache bristled. Medieval law sometimes included poison clauses. If a keeper died unconfessed, the document's sanctity was broken, allowing seizure. Was this the motive? Poirot returned to find the suspects in disarray. Candles guttered. Lavinia clutched a rosary. Reggie's flask was empty. Felicity's veil was soaked. Tears or rain? Silas stood by the window, staring into the storm as though it might offer absolution. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot announced, we have a second victim, Professor Drayton, poisoned at 4:15 a.m. The vault was locked. The plot, it doubles. Gasps. Lavinia fainted or pretended to. Felicity caught her with surprising strength. Poirot laid the cipher photograph on the table. The oath is void if the keeper dies unshriven, unconfessed. Someone believed this medieval clause could legitimize theft. Reggie laughed hysterically. Superstition? We're not in the Dark Ages. Yet Drayton is dead, Poirot replied. And Evelyn's throat was cut to ensure she could not confess. The killer is thorough. Japp burst in, dragging a sodden Constable Hargreaves. Found this in the billiard room, sir. A sodden auction catalogue, Reggie's forgery, stuffed down the cushion of the settee. But the ink had run. Beneath the printed 100,000, a penciled note in Reggie's hand. Reggie paled. I wrote it, yes. Planned to photograph the Codex while Evelyn slept, got drunk instead. Passed out at 3 ans, woke at 5 with the maids. Ask them. The maids confirmed, Reggie snoring, fully dressed, cue in hand. Poirot? Then who used your note? Poirot produced the wax impression from Evelyn's desk. Someone made a duplicate key months ago, but observe. He held it beside the original. The wax showed two impressions, one deeper. The duplicate was used, then recut. The killer had a spare of the spare. He turned to Silas. Monsieur Grubb, you are a forger. Could you cut a key from wax? Silas hesitated. Aye, but I'd need a file, a vice. Both in the porter's lodge, Poirot finished. Yet your alibi is the kettle. Boiled at 6:02, you were asleep. Silas nodded slowly. Unless someone else used my tools. Poirot spread a floor plan on the table. Candles flickered. He marked movements in red ink. But the vault was locked at 11:01 p.m. Japp protested. How did Drayton enter at 4:15? Poirot's eyes gleamed. He was already inside. Back in the vault, Poirot pressed a panel behind the pressure cradle. A section of stone swung inward, a priest's hole from the Reformation, forgotten in modern plans. Inside, a narrow staircase spiraling upward into the walls, emerging behind a tapestry in the library stacks. Drayton hid here at 10:55 p.m., Poirot explained. Planned to photograph the codex after hours. Evelyn discovered him at 4:15. In panic, he offered the trumpet. Listen, I'll explain, but the capsule was meant for her. He miscalculated the dose. Suicide by reflex. Japp whistled. So Drayton's death was accidental? No. The capsule was prepared. Someone knew he would hide. Lavinia's rosary beads were not ivory. They were cyanide capsules painted white. She wept. For mercy. If the archive fell, I intended... Poirot interrupted gently. You intended to die for history, but you did not kill. Under black light, borrowed from the darkroom, the cipher photograph revealed a second message in ultraviolet ink beneath the prick marks. Lavinia's initials, her handwriting. She stared, horrified. I wrote it months ago. Evelyn asked me to forge a warning to scare Drayton away. I never... Felicity produced a telegram from her reticule. Dated yesterday. The Chicago Museum had discovered the weight substitution, Drayton's forgery. Felicity's motive collapsed. Then why stay? Poirot asked. Felicity's voice was steel. Because the clause still stands. If the keeper dies, the crown seizes. I needed Evelyn alive to consent. A scream from the library stacks. Constable Hargreaves found the tapestry torn, the priest's hole open. Footprints in dust, size 5, Lavinia's, led to a dropped cataloger's glove, luminous phosphor on the fingers. Lavinia was in the drawing room. The glove was her spare. Poirot weighed the codex again. 802 kilos. But under magnification, the gold leaf on the oath page was modern gold paint, flaking. The real codex had been substituted weeks ago. The forgery was returned after the murder. Why? To maintain the illusion, Poirot said. The killer needed us to believe the codex was still in play. Silas stepped forward, voice shaking. I swapped the codex 3 weeks ago. Dr. Hartwell's orders. She feared theft. The forgery was to fool intruders. I hid the real one in the priest's hole. But when I checked this morning, he gestured to the vault. It's gone. Thunder crashed. Lightning illuminated the vault. In the flash, Poirot saw it. A third sheet on the floor beneath Evelyn's body. He lifted it gently. A child's drawing, crayon crude, a house with a red roof. Beneath, Mummy, I'm sorry, L. Lavinia's handwriting, but the crayon was fresh. A child's scrawl. Poirot's eyes widened. Lavinia is not the killer. She is the daughter. Lavinia collapsed, sobbing. Evelyn was my mother, illegitimate, Emberwick blood. She hid me as a cataloger to protect me. The cipher, it names me. If published, I lose everything. I forged the warning to scare Drayton. I stopped the clock to create confusion. But I didn't kill her. Poirot believed her. The rosary, The glove, the cipher, all self-incrimination to protect the secret. Jap burst in. The real codex, it's in the porter's lodge, wrapped in oilskin, hidden in the kettle. Silas paled. I put it there last night, after the first alarm, Dr. Hartwell's orders. Poirot's mind raced. The codex never left the building. The murder was not about theft. Then why kill Evelyn? Jap demanded. Poirot looked at the child's drawing, the cyanide trumpet, the weight forgery, the priest's hole. Because, he said softly, the killer needed the oath voided. And the only way was to ensure the keeper died unshriven, and to frame the heir. He turned to the group. The net closes. Tomorrow at dawn, Hercule Poirot will name the murderer. Tonight, sleep lightly. Lightning flashed again. In the white glare, every face looked guilty. Chapter 6. The Revelation. The storm had spent itself by 5:30 in the morning, leaving only a steady, mournful drip from the gutters and a sky the color of wet ash. The archive smelled of candle smoke, damp stone, and the faint metallic residue of fear. Gas had been restored at 4:12 a.m. The electric bulbs buzzed like trapped insects, casting a cold, unforgiving light over the entrance hall where the final act would play. Poirot had not slept. He stood before the marble fireplace in the drawing room, coat immaculate, mustaches waxed to lethal points. A small silver tray at his elbow bearing 1 cup of chocolate, thick, dark, unsweetened. The little gray cells, he reflected, required fuel for the sprint to the finish. At 5:45, the suspects were summoned. They entered in single file, each carrying the weight of the night on their shoulders. Constable Hargreaves locked the door. The key turned with a sound like a coffin lid. Poirot waited until the silence was absolute, then began. Mesdames et messieurs, we have danced a complicated waltz. Murder, forgery, poison, locked rooms, vanished minutes, breaths on mercury. 2 deaths. Professor Drayton at 4:15 a.m. Dr. Hartwell at 5:33. 1 codex, real and false. 1 child's drawing. 1 oath that could unmake a dynasty. It is time to stop the music. He placed the objects on the table in a perfect line. 10 pieces, Poirot said. 1 picture. Drayton hid in the priest's hole at 10:55 p.m. to photograph the codex. He carried the cyanide capsule in his trumpet as insurance. If discovered, he would threaten Evelyn, force consent. But Evelyn, insomniac, descended at 4:15 to check the vault after the earlier alarm. She found him. In panic, Drayton pressed the trumpet to her ear. Listen, I'll explain. But the capsule lodged in his own mouth when he demonstrated. He swallowed reflexively. Death in 90 seconds, suicide, murder by design. He turned to Silas. You, monsieur, forged the weight substitute weeks ago on Evelyn's orders. You hid the real codex in the kettle. But you also left the priest's whole tapestry unlatched, a deliberate lure. Drayton took the bait. Silas's face crumpled. She asked me to, said it would scare him off. At 5:29, the grandfather clock was stopped for exactly 1 minute. Phosphor dust from catalog gloves. The thermometer was manipulated with the rubber bulb. Bergamot oil added to create the phantom scent. The time lock advanced to 5:57. Why? From the corridor, the killer watched Evelyn reset the dial to 6 bars at 5:33. They knew the combination. They had the duplicate key cut from the wax impression months earlier. They entered, cut her throat, dragged the body inside, staged the fingerprint with a rubber stamp taken from Evelyn's desk, wiped the razor on the ribbon, returned the key, locked the door. The time lock sealed at 5:57, illusion complete. Poirot held up the crayon sketch. Lavinia is Evelyn's daughter, illegitimate Emberwick heir. The cipher names her. If published, she inherits everything, estate, codex, title. But the medieval clause voids the oath if the keeper dies unshriven. Evelyn planned to publish to secure Lavinia's future. Someone needed Evelyn silenced forever, and Lavinia framed. Lavinia sobbed. I drew it when I was 7. She kept it in her locket. The killer stole it to plant. The forgery was substituted 3 weeks ago. The real codex never left the kettle until last night. The killer needed us to believe theft was the motive, but the true goal was silence. Evelyn was writing a monograph exposing the cipher and Lavinia's birth. Publication would ruin one person above all. You, madam, are not the last Emberwick. Lavinia is. The estate, the title, the Chicago offer, all collapse if the illegitimate heir is legitimized. You discovered the cipher, transcription in Evelyn's desk last week. You forged the auction catalog to frame Reggie. You left the priest's hole unlatched for Drayton. You filled the capsule, knowing his habit of pressing the trumpet to his lips. You stopped the clock with catalog gloves stolen from Lavinia. You used the bulb syringe, bergamot, to incriminate her. You cut Evelyn's throat with the letter opener from her own desk, wiped it on the ribbon, planted the fingerprint stamp. You returned the forgery to the cradle to maintain the illusion. Felicity's face was marble. Preposterous. Poirot produced the letter opener, found at 3 a.m. in the umbrella stand, blade cleaned but hinge blood-flecked. Your diamonds, madame. They are paste. The real stones were sold to pay debts. The Chicago telegram was genuine. Withdrawal because they discovered the forgery. You needed the estate intact to sell the land after the trust dissolved. Evelyn's death voided the oath. Lavinia framed would disqualize her. Perfect. Felicity laughed, high, brittle. History is written by the victors, Monsieur Poirot. The Emberwicks built this empire on bastardy and blood. I merely pruned the family tree. Poirot's voice was ice. You pruned a mother and a daughter's future. The oath is safe. Lavinia will publish. The crown will recognize her. You, madam, will hang. Japp snapped on the cuffs. Felicity did not struggle. Lavinia approached Poirot, eyes shining. She kept the drawing all these years? Oui, mademoiselle. In her heart, you were always the true codex. Dawn crept through the windows, pale and forgiving. The real codex was returned to the vault. Pressure plate recalibrated, time lock reset. Lavinia would become keeper. Reggie's debts were quietly paid by an anonymous donor. Poirot suspected Felicity's remaining paste diamonds. Silas received a full pardon and a pension. Poirot sipped the last of his chocolate. Another triumph for order and method. The little gray cells, they never disappoint. He raised the cup in salute to the portraits on the wall. To the Emberwicks, may their secrets now rest in peace. Outside, the city stirred. A milk float clinked. A sparrow landed on the sill and shook rain from its wings. The archive exhaled, and for the first time in centuries it sounded almost content. Chapter 7. Justice served. The sun rose over Bloomsbury at 7:03 a.m. on 14th November 1926, a pale, reluctant disk that turned the wet pavements the color of old pearls. The storm had scrubbed the air clean. Even the soot on the Emberwick Archive's brickwork looked less accusatory. Inside, the house breathed differently. No longer the guarded inhale of secrets, but the slow exhale of a patient waking from fever. Hercule Poirot stood on the front steps, overcoat buttoned to the throat, walking stick tapping a gentle rhythm against the iron railing. Behind him, Inspector Japp supervised the loading of Lady Felicity, Emberwick, into a Black Maria. She wore the same black veil, now torn at the hem, and her wrists were cuffed with the quiet efficiency of Scotland Yard. She did not look back. The diamonds, paced everyone, had been confiscated as evidence. They rattled in a paper bag like cheap marbles. Poirot watched the van disappear around the square, then turned to the little knot of survivors assembled in the entrance hall. The steel door stood open. Electric light, restored and steady, poured across the flagstones, erasing the shadows that had hidden so much. The blood pool had been scrubbed. Only a faint pink stain remained, like a blush on the stone. The pressure cradle gleamed, freshly oiled. The real Codex Emberwick rested upon it, 1/802 kilograms of history, its gold leaf catching the bulbs in tiny, defiant sparks. Lavinia Blackwood, soon to be Lavinia Emberwick, stood beside it in a simple gray dress, the catalog apron folded away forever. Her ink-stained fingers trembled as she touched the vellum. "It's heavier than I remembered," she whispered. Poirot smiled. "Truth always is, mademoiselle." Silas Grubb shuffled forward, cap in hand. The pardon, signed by the Home Secretary himself, crinkled in his pocket. He placed a small parcel on the reading table, the forgery wrapped in oilskin. "For the archives," he said gruffly. "Proof of what we survived." Poirot inclined his head. "And proof of your redemption, monsieur." The library had been transformed into a makeshift courtroom. A long table served as the bench. Jap's notebook became the record. A police stenographer sat in the corner, fingers flying. The suspects, no longer suspects, gave statements under oath. Captain Reginald Thorne spoke first. His voice was steady, the limp forgotten. "I forged the catalog, yes, planned to sell photographs. But I never touched the codex. The glove was mine, stolen from my room while I slept off a bottle of whiskey. The note, 'Meet me vault 430, wasn't my handwriting. Lady Felicity imitated it. She knew my debts. She paid a runner to deliver it to Evelyn unsigned. Evelyn ignored it, thought it another of my drunken jokes." He produced a pawn ticket. Hatton Garden, dated $10 November. "Sold my service revolver to cover a marker. Felicity bought the ticket back yesterday. Blackmail." Jap nodded. "We'll trace the runner." Lavinia laid the child's drawing on the table. The crayon house, the red roof, the scrawled apology. "Mother kept this in her locket. Felicity stole it the night before, pried it open while we argued in the office. She planted it under the body to make me look unstable. The rosary beads..." She opened her hand. The painted cyanide capsules rolled like pearls. "I made them after Father died. If the secret came out and ruined us, I planned to join her. Felicity found them in my drawer, replaced one with a real capsule for Drayton." Her voice broke. "She said history demanded purity. I say it demands mercy. I swapped the books on Dr. Hartwell's orders. Real one in the kettle, forgery in the cradle. She feared theft after the first alarm. Lady Felicity knew. She saw me carry the oilskin parcel, ordered me to leave the priest's hole unlatched. Said it would scare the professor. I thought it harmless." He looked at Lavinia. "I'd have died for your mother, miss. She gave me back my name." A solicitor from Lincoln's Inn arrived, briefcase bulging with parchment. The Emberwick Trust deed, 1789, sealed in red wax, lay open. The medieval clause was read aloud. "Should the keeper perish unshriven, the codex shall revert to the crown and the trust dissolve." The solicitor's spectacles flashed. Lady Felicity's actions voided her claim. Miss Blackwood, illegitimate but acknowledged in Dr. Hartwell's sealed codicil, is the sole heir. The codex remains with the archive. The estate passes to her. Poirot orchestrated the epilogues with the precision of a watchmaker. Reporters gathered on the pavement, umbrellas furled, notebooks hungry. Jap gave a terse statement. "Locked room murder solved by Monsieur Hercule Poirot. 1 arrest. Case closed." No mention of royal bastards or medieval clauses. The Crown had requested discretion. Poirot obliged. Lavinia addressed them from the steps, voice clear. "The Emberwick Archive opens to the public next spring. The codex will be on display, under glass, under guard, under truth." A cheer went up. Cameras flashed. Poirot slipped away before the bulbs could catch him. Poirot sat in a first-class compartment, the boat train gliding through Kentish orchards. A picnic hamper from Fortnum's rested on the seat, quail's eggs, foie gras, a split of 1911 Paul Roger. He poured a glass, raised it to the window. "To order," he murmured, "and to mothers who keep crayon drawings in lockets." The train whistle sounded, mournful and free. The vault had been rebuilt. Triple locks, new pressure plate, a discreet plaque. Lavinia stood before it on opening day. A small crowd hushed. She wore the ribbon and key at her throat, now hers by right. Silas, in a new porter's uniform, stood proudly at the door. Reggie, sober and limping genuinely from a sprained ankle, handed out programs. The codex lay open to the oath page. The blood drop had been carefully lifted, only a faint shadow remained. Lavinia touched it gently. "History," she said to the visitors, "is not just what is written. It's what we choose to forgive." The Emberwick case, satisfying. The little gray cells performed admirably. Motive, not gold, not glory, but the oldest poison lineage. Lesson, even archives bleed. Chocolate consumed 14 cups. Mustache symmetry, perfect. He closed the diary, twirled his mustache, and reached for the cocoa. Chapter 8. Echoes in the Stacks. The Emberwick Archive never truly closed, even at night. It simply dimmed its lamps and waited, like a patient librarian who knows someone will always return for one more book. On the evening of 21st November 1926, 1 week after Lady Felicity Emberwick's arrest, the building exhaled the day's visitors and settled into its familiar hush. Gas jets burned low along the corridors. The grandfather clock in the entrance hall ticked with the solemnity of a heartbeat. Outside, a thin fog curled off the Thames and pressed against the windows, as though the river itself wanted to read over someone's shoulder. Lavinia Hartwell Emberwick, keeper, heir, daughter, stood alone in the vault at 11:47 p.m. She wore a dark green cardigan over her catalog apron, the ribbon and key at her throat catching the single bulb's glow. The Codex Emberwick rested on its cradle, open to the coronation oath page. The faint shadow where Evelyn's blood had dried was barely visible now. A ghost of a ghost. Lavinia traced it with one finger, then closed the manuscript gently as one might close a loved one's eyes. She had dismissed Silas at 10, sent Reggie home with a bottle of decent claret, for medicinal limp, she'd said, and locked the public doors herself. The staff had protested. A keeper should not be alone after dark. But Lavinia needed the silence. She needed to speak to the building without witnesses. She climbed the spiral stairs to the third-floor gallery, illuminated MSS, where the air smelled of vellum and candle smoke. The shelves rose like cathedral walls, leather spines gleaming. She walked slowly, fingertips brushing titles. Hours of Jean d'Evreux, Psalter of St. Aldrich, the Emberwick Bestiary. At the far end, a narrow window overlooked the square. Fog blurred the street lamps into halos. Lavinia stopped before a gap in the shelving. A single volume was missing, Codex Emberwick V, the forgery. She had catalogued it herself that afternoon, then carried it to the vault for safekeeping. Yet the gap stared back like a missing tooth. A soft thump echoed from below. She froze. The sound came again, muffled, deliberate, from the direction of the priest's hole. Her pulse quickened. The police had sealed it after Felicity's arrest. Wax and wire, official stamps. No one could enter. Lavinia descended the stairs, keyring jingling. The entrance hall was empty. The grandfather clock showed 11:53. She crossed to the tapestry, the Hunt of the Unicorn, and lifted it. The panel behind was intact, but a faint draft carried the scent of bergamot and wet stone. She pressed her ear to the wood. Breathing. Slow, deliberate, human. Lavinia did not scream. She had spent her life among secrets. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. She slipped the vault key from her ribbon, inserted it into the hidden lock Poirot had shown her, and turned. The panel swung inward on silent hinges. Candlelight spilled from the priest's hole. A single flame, steady, unnatural. Professor Percival Drayton sat on the bottom step, ear trumpet in his lap, eyes wide and very much alive. Lavinia's knees buckled. "You're dead," Drayton's voice was a croak. "Was meant to be?" Cyanide capsule, gelatin, not poison, Felicity's little joke. She filled it with harmless bitters. I bit down, tasted wormwood, played dead. Waited for the hue and cry to pass. He stood, joints creaking. Needed the world to believe me gone. The codex, real one, holds more than the oath. Page 112, ultraviolet ink, a map, Templar treasure, enough to buy a new life. Lavinia's hand went to the ribbon. "You swapped the books. 3 weeks ago. Silas thought he was following Evelyn's orders. I forged her note. The real codex has been in the priest's hole since. I came back tonight to retrieve it." He stepped forward. The candle revealed his face, gaunt, bearded, eyes fever-bright. "Give me the key, child. We'll split the gold. 50-50. You'll never catalog again." Lavinia backed away. "You let Felicity hang for your murder. Collateral, she was useful. The glove, the catalog, the laudanum lie, all her. I watched from the hole, laughed when Poirot named her." Lavinia turned and ran. Drayton lunged, trumpet clattering. She reached the vault corridor, slammed the steel door, spun the chub. The time lock clicked to 6 a.m. 7 hours away. Safe. But Drayton knew the priest's whole staircase emerged in the library stacks. He would circle. Lavinia raced upstairs, heart hammering. The telephone, Evelyn's office. She burst in, grabbed the receiver. Dead, wires cut. A shadow moved in the stacks. Drayton carrying the forgery like a shield. "You can't stop history, girl. The map is mine." Lavinia grabbed a bronze bookend, Griffin, 14th century, and hurled it. It struck Drayton's shoulder. He staggered. She darted past, down the main staircase, into the entrance hall. The front door, locked, chained. The windows, barred since the first alarm. She was trapped with a ghost. Drayton descended slowly, candle in one hand, forgery in the other. "The real codex is in the cradle, isn't it? You moved it from the kettle. Open the vault or I burn this." He touched the flame to the forgery's corner. Vellum curled, blackened. Lavinia's mind raced. The cradle's pressure plate, 1.8 kilon tolerance. The forgery was 1.798. If she swapped them under duress, the alarm would not sound. Drayton would escape with the real codex, and the world would never know. She unlocked the vault. Drayton followed, triumphant. Inside, the codex gleamed. Drayton set the burning forgery on the table, flames licking the vellum. "Swap them, now." Lavinia lifted the real codex. Drayton reached for it. 1.802 kilon of vellum and gold struck the flagstones. The impact jarred the pressure plate. Alarm bells shrieked. 3 constabularies as promised. Drayton lunged. Lavinia swung the bronze griffin. It connected with his temple. He fell, candle guttering. Sirens wailed in the square. Blue lamps flashed through the fog. Jap burst in with 6 constables, revolver drawn. "Lavinia, you all right?" She nodded, breathless. "Drayton, alive! Tried to steal the codex." Jap cuffed the professor, who groaned but did not resist. The forgery smoldered on the table. Lavinia stamped it out with her apron. Poirot arrived at 12:15, summoned by a frantic telegram Lavinia had sent from the porter's lodge before the wires were cut. He surveyed the scene. Drayton bleeding, the codex safe, Lavinia trembling but unbroken. "Mon Dieu," he said softly. "The dead return, but not for long." With Drayton in custody, Poirot examined the real codex under black light. Page 112 revealed the ultraviolet map, a coastline, a church, a crypt, coordinates in Latin. Cornwall, Poirot murmured. St. Aldrich's Abbey ruins, the Templar horde, real perhaps, but not for us. Lavinia closed the book. It stays here, under glass, with a plaque. Some treasures are not gold. The Emberwick Archive reopened to record crowds. The Codex Emberwick V exhibit drew gasps. The forgery that fooled a murderess. Drayton, tried for conspiracy and attempted theft, received 10 years. Felicity's death sentence was commuted to life. She spent her days in Holloway knitting scarves no one wanted. Lavinia hired Silas as head porter, Reggie as lecturer. The limping rogue, a cautionary tale. The priest's hole was bricked up, a brass plate installed. Poirot visited on Christmas Eve. Lavinia served chocolate, Belgian, thick as midnight. They stood in the vault, the codex glowing. "You were right," she said. "History forgives." Poirot raised his cup. To mothers, daughters, and the books that bind them. Outside, snow began to fall. Soft, deliberate, covering the city in a clean white page. Chapter 9. The Keeper's Silence. Snow fell in thick, deliberate flakes on the night of 24th of December, 1926, muffling Bloomsbury Square until the city sounded like a library after closing. The Emberwick Archive's windows glowed amber against the white, each pane a small hearth in the dark. Inside, the building had never felt more alive. Visitors had left hours ago. The public exhibit, Codex Emberwick V, the forgery that fooled a murderess, was locked behind velvet ropes. The grandfather clock struck 11 with the soft authority of a judge dismissing court. Lavinia Hartwell Emberwick stood alone in the vault, candle in one hand, the real codex in the other. She wore a dressing gown of deep green velvet, her mother's rescued from storage, and the ribbon with the vault key lay against her collarbone like a heartbeat. The pressure cradle was empty. She had removed the manuscript at dusk, telling Silas it was for conservation cleaning. A lie, gentle but necessary. She set the candle on the reading table and opened the codex to page 112. The ultraviolet map, Cornwall, St. Aldrich's ruins, the Templar crypt, shimmered faintly under the black light lamp she had borrowed from the darkroom. For weeks she had studied it in secret, tracing the Latin coordinates with a magnifying glass, cross-referencing with medieval charts in the restricted stacks. The treasure was real. Gold, relics, a chalice said to have held Christ's blood. Enough to rebuild the crumbling Emberwick estate 10 times over. Enough to silence every debt, every doubt. Lavinia closed the book. The weight of it, 1,802 kilograms, felt heavier than the estate, heavier than history. She carried it up the spiral stairs to the third-floor gallery, past the shelves that had watched her grow from ink-stained child to keeper. At the far end, behind a false panel Poirot had missed, lay a small iron safe, installed in 1789 for documents too dangerous even for the vault. She spun the combination, her mother's birthday, and placed the codex inside. The door clanged shut. She pocketed the key. In Evelyn's office, now hers, she sat at the desk and took out a single sheet of heavy cream paper. The fountain pen was her mother's, the ink indigo. She wrote slowly, each word deliberate. "If you read this, the codex is gone from its cradle. I have hidden it where only the worthy will find it, not for gold, but for truth. The map on page 112 leads to St. Aldrich's crypt, but the treasure is not what you seek. It is a mirror. Look into it and see what you are willing to become. My mother died to protect this secret. Lady Felicity killed to possess it. Professor Drayton faked his death to steal it. I have chosen silence. The codex will return when the archive needs it most. When a keeper faces a choice between history and greed. Until then, let the cradle hold the forgery. Let the world believe the story ended with Poirot's triumph. She folded the letter, sealed it with green wax and the Emberwick griffin, and slipped it into the safe beside the codex. The key, she threaded it onto a new ribbon, black silk, and tied it around her neck beneath the vault key. 2 keys, 2 burdens. Lavinia carried Codex Emberwick V, the forgery, to the vault. She placed it on the cradle. The pressure plate settled with a soft click. No alarm. The weight was perfect, 1.798 kilo. She adjusted the gold paint where it had flaked, touched up the blood shadow with a camel hair brush, and diluted vermilion. By candlelight, it was indistinguishable from the real. She locked the vault, set the time lock to 6:01 a.m., and climbed the main staircase to the guest wing. Her room, once Evelyn's, was warm. The fire banked low. On the mantel sat the child's drawing, "Mummy, I'm sorry." L. She had framed it in plain oak, no glass. She kissed her fingers, touched the crayon house, and whispered, "I'm keeping the promise." Silas Grubb had not gone home. He stood in the porter's lodge, kettle hissing, watching the vault corridor through a crack in the door. He had seen Lavinia descend with the real codex, ascend with the forgery. He had seen the black light glow in the gallery. His missing fingers ached with the old urge to pick, to pry, to possess. But 20 years in Dartmoor had taught him the price of greed. And Evelyn's trust, her second chance, had taught him something heavier. He locked the lodge, pocketed the master key, and climbed to the 3rd floor. The false panel was ajar. He opened the safe, combination Evelyn's birthday, the same as Lavinia's, and found the codex and the letter. He read it by the light of his bullseye lantern, eyes widening at the map, narrowing at the warning. He closed the safe, spun the dial, and left the panel as he found it. Downstairs he brewed tea, bergamot strong, and sat in the entrance hall until dawn, guarding the silence. The time lock clicked. Lavinia descended key in hand and opened the vault. The forgery gleamed innocently. She smiled, a small sad curve of the lips, and reset the dial to 9 a.m. for the staff. Reggie arrived at 8, limping less, carrying a hamper from Fortnum's, mince pies, a goose, a bottle of 1911 Paul Roger. "For the new keeper," he said, "and for the old rogue who owes her his life." Silas joined them in the reading room. The fire roared. They ate in silence at first, then Reggie raised a glass. "To Evelyn, and to Lavinia, who kept the flame." Lavinia's eyes glistened. "To mothers, and to secrets that stay buried." The great detective arrived unannounced, snow on his shoulders, a parcel under his arm. He surveyed the vault, the forgery, the cradle. His eyes missed nothing. "You have made changes, mademoiselle." "Conservation," Lavinia said smoothly. "The real codex is resting." Poirot's mustache twitched. He unwrapped the parcel, a jar of quince jam, 1925 vintage, and a small book, The Art of Silence by an anonymous author. "For the keeper who knows when to speak," he said, "and when to let history sleep." They drank chocolate in the office. Poirot noticed the black ribbon beneath the green, the faint bulge of 2 keys. He said nothing. The forgery remained in the cradle for 99 years. Visitors marveled at its beauty, never noticing the gold paint's subtle flake. The exhibit grew. Felicity's diamonds, paste, Drayton's ear trumpet, the child's drawing. Lavinia became legendary, keeper for 50 years, retiring in 1976 at 78. She never married, never spoke of the map. Silas died in 1943, the master key buried with him. Reggie sobered, lectured at Oxford, published Confessions of a Limping Rogue. The estate flourished, donations, grants, Lavinia's quiet investments. In 2025, on the centenary of the murder, a new keeper, Dr. Evelyn Hartwell Emberwick II, Lavinia's great niece, opened the iron safe during renovations. She found the codex, the letter, the black ribbon worn thin. She read the warning, studied the map, and faced the mirror. She returned the codex to the safe, spun the dial, and hung the forgery back in the cradle. Some secrets, she decided, are heavier than gold. The snow falls as it did that Christmas. I am old now, but the keys still hang at my throat. The codex sleeps. The world believes Poirot solved everything. Let it. History is not what we write. It is what we choose to carry in silence. Mother, I kept the flame. She closed the diary, placed it in the safe, and locked it with the black key. The vault light dimmed. The archive exhaled content. Chapter 10. The last page. The Emberwick Archive closed its doors to the public at 5 p.m. on 14th of November 2025. Exactly 99 years to the day since Dr. Evelyn Hartwell's murder. Snow fell in thick, deliberate flakes, the same weightless hush that had blanketed Bloomsbury in 1926. Inside, the building glowed with electric warmth. The gas jets were long gone, replaced by LED reproductions that mimicked candlelight without the risk. The grandfather clock, restored, its pendulum now quartz, struck 5 with a digital chime. Visitors lingered in the Codex Emberwick V exhibit, photographing the forgery under glass, reading the plaques. On loan from the Hartwell Emberwick collection. None noticed the faint flake in the gold paint on page 112. None knew the real codex had not seen daylight in a century. Dr. Evelyn Hartwell Emberwick II, keeper 38, great-niece of Lavinia, stood in the vault at 5:30 p.m. She wore a charcoal skirt and high-necked blouse, steel-rimmed spectacles flashing under the LEDs. Her hair, ice blonde like her great aunt's, was drawn back severely. At her throat, 2 ribbons, green and black, 2 keys. The vault door stood open. The cradle held the forgery. She had removed it at dawn, telling the staff it was for centenary conservation. Another gentle lie. Evelyn climbed the spiral stairs to the 3rd-floor gallery. The false panel, reinforced with steel after 1976, opened with a soft hiss. The iron safe waited. Combination unchanged. 1403 to 1884, Evelyn Hartwell's birthday. Inside, the real codex wrapped in acid-free silk, Lavinia's diary, the sealed letter from 1926, the black ribbon worn thin but intact. She lifted the codex, 1802 Kiona. The vellum had yellowed slightly, but the illuminations glowed. Lapis, vermilion, gold leaf untouched by time. Page 112 shimmered under the gallery's black light. The ultraviolet map, the Templar crypt, the chalice. She had studied it for months, cross-referencing satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, medieval land grants. The site existed, a collapsed chapel on the Cornish coast, now a car park for surfers. The treasure was real, enough to save the archive from bankruptcy, dry rot, leaking roofs, a $12 million deficit. Evelyn sat at Lavinia's desk, now hers, and opened the 1926 letter. The wax cracked like old bones. She read aloud, voice steady. Some secrets are heavier than gold. She turned to Lavinia's diary, final entry, 31st December 1976. The world believes Poirot solved everything. Let it. History is what we choose to carry in silence. Evelyn closed the diary. Her reflection stared back from the dark window. Evelyn Hartwell's face, Lavinia's eyes. She touched the child's drawing on the mantel, still unframed. Mummy, I'm sorry. L. The crayon had faded, but the apology remained. The archives board had given her an ultimatum: sell assets, or close by 2026. The forgery exhibit drew crowds, but not enough. Donors wanted spectacle, the real codex, the map, the treasure. A reality show had offered $50 million for exclusive rights to the dig. History's greatest heist, live. Evelyn opened her laptop. An email from the producer blinked. Silas Grubb's great-grandson, Thomas Grubb, Head porter, 55, knocked softly. He carried a tray, Belgian chocolate, thick as midnight, and a single mince pie. "Thought you'd be here, Dr. E. Centennial Night. Your great-aunt always took chocolate alone." Evelyn smiled. "Join me?" Thomas hesitated, then sat. He had Silas's eyes, small, shrewd, kind. Found something in the lodge. Grandfather's journal, 1943. He slid a leather-bound book across the desk. Page 112. Evelyn opened it. Silas's handwriting, spidery but clear. "The map is real. I dug a test hole in 39. Found a stone with the Templar cross. Told no one. Miss Lavinia said some treasures are curses. I believe her. Burn this if I die." Beneath, a charcoal sketch. The chapel ruins, the car park, an X-marked chalice. Thomas said, "I kept it. Thought you should know." Evelyn closed the journal. "Thank you." The board meeting was virtual, 12 faces on a screen, suits in London, New York, Tokyo. The chair, a hedge fund patriarch, spoke first. "Evelyn, the offer is 75 million. The archive survives. Your legacy?" "My legacy," she interrupted, "is not a balance sheet." She shared her screen, the 1926 letter, Lavinia's diary, Silas's journal. Silence. The chair sighed. "You'd let history die for sentiment?" "History," Evelyn said, "is what we choose to remember, not what we sell." She closed the laptop. The screen went black. Evelyn carried the real codex to the vault. The forgery waited on the table, gold paint touched up that morning. She weighed them side by side, 1.802 kilos and 1.798 kilos. The difference was 4 grams, imperceptible to the cradle, but a chasm to her conscience. She opened the real codex to page 112. With a scalpel, she carefully lifted the ultraviolet map, thin as onion skin, and slipped it into an envelope marked, "For the Crown." A cover letter. "The Emberwick Archive relinquishes all claim. The chalice belongs to history." She placed the forgery in the cradle. The pressure plate settled. No alarm. The staff gathered in the reading room, curators, porters, interns. Thomas poured champagne. Evelyn raised her glass. "To Evelyn Hartwell, to Lavinia, to Silas, to every keeper who chose silence over gold." They drank. The forgery glowed under glass in the exhibit hall, drawing gasps from late-night ticket holders. None knew the truth. Evelyn returned to the office. On the desk, a parcel, postmarked Brussels. Inside, a jar of quince jam, 2025 vintage, and a card in Poirot's unmistakable hand, though he had died in 1975. The little gray cells never retire. Some cases end only when the keeper chooses. "You have chosen well. H.P." She laughed, tears falling. The card was a forgery. Poirot's biographer, a friend of Lavinia's, had sent it every centennial. Tradition. Evelyn opened the iron safe. She placed inside, "The map is gone. The chalice is safe. The forgery remains. Some secrets are heavier than gold. Carry them lightly." She locked the safe. The combination remained 1403-1884. Evelyn stood in the vault. The forgery gleamed. She touched the cradle, whispered, "Good night, Mother." The lights dimmed to security mode. The building exhaled. Outside, snow covered the city in a clean white page. The Emberwick Archive thrives. A UNESCO site. The forgery exhibit is legendary. On the bicentennial, a new keeper, Dr. Lavinia Hartwell Emberwick IV, opens the safe during renovations. She finds the letters, the diary, the journal, no map. She reads the warning, smiles, and returns the forgery to the cradle. Some secrets, she decides, are heavier than gold. The vault light dims, the archive exhales, content.